Welcome. My name is Tony Russell, and in this module I will be discussing competitive intelligence and new product planning. Competitive intelligence can be a broad topic, and I will be covering the highlights in this presentation. I encourage those that are interested in the subject to review additional resources. I've listed some recommendations in the video description. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely mine and do not represent those of my current or previous employers. For this module, I will be covering the following objectives. Describe why competitive intelligence is needed in the pharmaceutical industry. Describe the difference between information and intelligence. Describe the key steps in the process of conducting competitive intelligence. Describe best practices in developing key intelligence questions. Describe how to work effectively with external competitive intelligence firms. And finally, describe market simulation exercises and utility in business planning. A good place to start is to define what is meant by competitive intelligence. In a broad sense, competitive intelligence is the collection and analysis of information to anticipate potential competitor activity, see beyond market disruptions, and interpret events without bias. Conducting effective competitive intelligence is an important element of business strategy, as it can provide insights into market dynamics in a structured and disciplined framework. To be clear, competitive intelligence is not spycraft, nor is it just running a simple Google search. I would also encourage you to review the Code of Ethics published by the Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professionals Organization. These guidelines are widely embraced by those that practice competitive intelligence to ensure ethical behavior. Why is competitive intelligence important in the pharmaceutical industry? Being effective in competitive intelligence can have a significant impact. When done correctly, the intelligence allows you to anticipate potential competitor moves and avoid product launch pitfalls. The intelligence can also allow you to proactively build barriers to competition. And you can revise your business strategy to respond rapidly to emerging competitive dynamics. However, there are plenty of examples of when competitive intelligence work is done incorrectly. And this can lead to serious negative effects. For example, using competitive intelligence to reinforce preconceived ideas about the marketplace can maintain harmful blind spots. Underestimating what your competition can do and failing to anticipate marketplace disruptions can be very difficult to recover from. Another common mistake is failing to account for other competitive factors that can impact your market, which we will cover on the next slide. For those that have attended business school, this diagram of the 5 competitive forces from Michael Porter should be familiar. When thinking about competitive intelligence and new product planning, it can be helpful to think about the competitive threats that can arise beyond your direct competitors, which is where we typically focus most of our attention. There is the threat of new entrants as well as the threat of substitute products. For example, an effective procedure could be a threat to a therapeutic approach. And it is worth mentioning that doing nothing can also be a competitive threat, such as patients not seeking treatment. The bargaining power of buyers is an element we are familiar with in the pharmaceutical industry, as payers can be highly effective in demanding deep discounts in certain therapeutic classes. One example of the bargaining power of suppliers in the pharmaceutical industry would be device manufacturers involved in drug and device combinations. As you think about your business strategy, be sure to think about the different avenues where competition can arise. A common mistake is to confuse competitive intelligence with competitive information. These terms should not be used interchangeably. For example, you can see from the diagram on the left that competitive information can come from a variety of sources. Each piece of information is like a puzzle piece. Competitive intelligence is the art of making sense of the puzzle pieces and what are the potential coherent patterns that emerge. Having a sense of the patterns can then allow you to plan for different potential scenarios. You can also construct different hypotheses about the competition may or may not do and then test the hypotheses using the appropriate methods. To provide some level of detail, I've listed some example scenarios in new product planning and product launch where competitive intelligence can be instrumental. For example, knowing the clinical development details of your competitors can be helpful in go, no-go decisions, as well as the development details of future studies for your specific program. Another example is around the pre-launch period. Having information about your competitors' anticipated messaging and position can be helpful to ensure a successful and differentiated launch. And after launch, having information on your competitors' potential litigation efforts and the potential emergence of generic options can be critical to ensure the defense of a leading position for your program. Here is an overview of the process typically employed when conducting competitive intelligence. It's important to start with the intelligence requirements first. We'll cover the topic of developing key intelligence questions on the next slide. The intelligence requirements will set the goals for the competitive intelligence project. Once the requirements are set, then the collection plan can be devised. This collection can include collecting information from secondary sources as well as from primary contacts, also referred to as human intelligence. After processing and analyzing the information obtained, a decision can be made to update the collection plan or to move on to final analysis. The final report should include a summary of the intelligence collected, supportive documentation, and any relevant data supporting the intelligence report. After a review of the competitive intelligence, two things can happen. 1. The intelligence requirements can be updated and revised as needed. And 2. The business strategy can be reviewed in light of the new intelligence. As you can see from the process map, conducting competitive intelligence is an iterative process. As discussed on the previous slide, the key first step in conducting competitive intelligence is to develop key intelligence questions. These questions will form the goals for the project, so it is critical to get this step correct before starting any work. In terms of best practices, it's important to know what to get right and what mistakes to avoid. The key things to get right include: spend the time needed up front to develop the questions. Don't rush the process. The questions need to be specific and actionable for your business strategy. And be sure to get input from a cross-functional team, especially leadership in clinical development and medical affairs. A key mistake to avoid in developing key intelligence questions is that competitive intelligence is not market research. Questions such as, "What do physicians think of our product profile?" are not suitable for competitive intelligence and better served through primary market research. Vague questions should be eliminated or revised to be more specific. Questions that provide answers that do not help with action should be cut as well. And the same applies for asking non-relevant questions. The key is to think how your strategy would change based on the answers to the questions. To help, I provided some real-world examples of key intelligence questions for reference. When thinking about sources of information for competitive intelligence, it's important to distinguish between primary and secondary sources of information. Primary sources are those derived from direct evidence or first-hand information. Examples of primary information are listed here. Human intelligence tends to be the common source of primary information. Secondary sources include aggregation or interpretation of the primary information. Examples are listed here for reference. When reporting competitive intelligence, it is critical to make the findings relevant, timely, and for the right audience. A few other issues to keep in mind include: communicate key analyses in a simple, easy-to-digest format. Align the analyses to key strategic business issues. Integrate the reporting into key strategic business discussions, evaluations, and planning. Develop a feedback loop to help address emerging questions resulting from new findings. And ensure the reports and alerts are being sent to the key stakeholders. It is also important to avoid some critical mistakes. For one, avoid the temptation to overload your audience with information. Doing so will lead to people tuning out and missing key information. Be sure to keep the focus and timing tight. And be sure to avoid the mistake of bias. There will be times in conducting competitive intelligence where unwelcome news arises. Don't try to downplay the negative news. The illustration on the right provides an example of how to think about focus when reporting competitive intelligence. There is a tendency at times to want to share the raw data as intelligence. Unfortunately, providing the data alone does not equate with actionable intelligence. Instead, focus on the top part of the pyramid in terms of applied intelligence within context. The Information and Data Act as supporting elements. By focusing on the applied intelligence, you'll find it easier to align with the business and strategic implications. Working with external competitive intelligence firms can be an effective approach for specific projects and ongoing surveillance. I've listed some of the ways to work effectively with external agencies. When evaluating potential firms, it can be helpful to understand which therapeutic areas they have expertise in. It can also help to understand how they approach clinical and scientific issues as well as business-related issues. Some firms tend to be strong in one area and not so strong in another. When sending out requests for proposals to potential firms, use the key intelligence questions you have developed with your team as a starting point. This will help firms properly budget for the scope of the project. It can also help to describe the strategic context of the questions. As for the execution of the project, the kickoff meeting is key to ensuring alignment on the goals. It's also important to set a regular cadence of check-in meetings to review progress. And this can be helpful to refine questions as appropriate when new information arises. When closing out the project, be clear about the goals for the deliverables. For example, will it be just a report or will there also be a team meeting to review the findings? I have also found it helpful to ask firms what their strategic viewpoint is regarding the findings. As a third party and with experience conducting competitive intelligence, external firms can help identify any potential blind spots related to your business strategy. I want to discuss briefly the utility of strategic simulation exercises. This can be an important exercise for you and your team to pressure test key assumptions and plans before execution. The goal of the exercise is to understand potential competitor moves under different strategic scenarios. By testing assumptions in this exercise, you will validate strategies for key scenarios, such as pre-launch or the entrance of new competitors. The exercise also allows teams to openly discuss and evaluate blind spots. This is critical when looking at your competitors' strengths against your weaknesses. Being able to anticipate potential competitor moves and counter moves can be helpful in designing new potential strategies. A key deliverable from the exercise can include a set of playbooks to help address potential competitor scenarios. These playbooks allow for a rapid response to competitive situations. There is certainly more that can be discussed about strategic simulation exercises, and this slide only touches on the high points. If interested in the topic, I would encourage you to explore the topic further. And please feel free to contact me for any references. Competitive intelligence is one of the critical elements in the new product planning toolbox. A few other learnings to keep in mind include: the art of competitive intelligence lies in defining potential strategic scenarios from the various bits of information. Competitive intelligence is not synonymous with primary market research. Spend the time needed to develop specific and strategically relevant key intelligence questions. Focusing on the business strategy implications of competitive intelligence is key when reporting findings. Remember, competitive intelligence is an iterative process, as answers will lead to new questions. I hope you found this module helpful. Please feel free to contact me via LinkedIn if you have any questions or feedback. And be sure to visit the new product planning website for additional resources. Thank you.